I started it before I did River Queen. I had been thinking about it for years and years and years, and there'd been many things about it that sort of niggled me. Something about the woman in the film, Puhi, Maori, the Tūhoe woman, plagued me. It just plagued me. I couldn't get her out of my mind, and these questions about her. You know, I'd formed certain conclusions when I made the first film, which were to some degree accurate, but there were also other readings that were also accurate and possibly even deeper, and I couldn't go into those when I made the first film because it was just a here and now documentary, fly on the wall. What you saw was what you got, and I was happy with that film. I am happy with that film, but this film goes right back and asks, how did she become who she was? So I decided to make Reign of the Children mainly because the subject of the original documentary I'd made, it sort of plagued me, it haunted me, and I couldn't get things about that woman out of my mind. There were questions that I couldn't answer, and I wanted to find out the answers. Some of the things were, why was she bent so double? You know, was that just simply an old age thing? Did she sweep with a short broom like some of the elderly women did it in New Guinea? Or was she actually really burdened by something else, something psychological? And if so, what was that psychological thing? What was it in her past that had happened? I didn't know. I had hints of it, but I didn't know. And why was she so obsessed by her son, this man-child, 40-year-old son? Was it, you know, this incredible maternal love, this love beyond herself, that was part of it? Or was she trying to make up for something that had gone on before? And so it was like a detective story for me. You know, I'd stay with people, I'd visit people. The people were the thing that I loved about making the film. I'm from the country. I feel a real empathy, I think, for, you know, people in that community. I like hanging out with them. And I guess partly as a response to that, they gave me their trust. And they said things that are not normally in documentaries. Well, this is an odd film, a hybrid, because it's as much drama as documentary. It's got a lot of drama in it. We recreated the stories they told us, and we recreated them in many cases with their sons and daughters and their grandchildren, and then we brought in some professional actors to help out, you know, Tim Morrison and Rena Rowan, Tangaroa Emile and Wairoy Shortland. But for the most part, it's locals enacting the stories of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and playing them when they were younger. And they're related. It's like fantastic. And we were able to get really extraordinary performances from them. And these people would almost, particularly the older people, Miriama, who plays her in her early 30s, would try and avail themselves of her wairua, her spirit, and try to get into the mindset that she had. Some things would happen, like we were setting off some pyrotechnics, as you know, as if it's not dynamite, but supposedly it was meant to be dynamite, and they were going off in the trees by the river. And in some areas, traditionally, early part of the 20th century, some of the locals worked for the council and they'd nick the dynamite, and so when a tangi would happen, it was felt at that time that if you set off the dynamite, it would clear the passages to the afterlife. So various accidents happened as a result of that. So we were trying to recreate that idea. Some of the dynamite was also used for fishing, so there were a few one-armed fishermen around as well. But and so we set off these small charges in the trees, and I think it was 3 or 4 more porks landed in the tree simultaneously, and it was at night. And the locals said, "Oh, you know, they are our kaitiakis, our sort of guardians, and I don't think we should be filming here anymore." And we spent about 3 hours setting up, or 2 hours setting up, and we went, okay. So we just moved on, and we had a lot of things happen like that. Nancy Tate, Kiro Nancy Tate, was our iwi co-producer, and we filmed a body tree, which was a recreation of stuff that happened right up until at least the 1940s, where some of the bodies would be hung from a tree, wrapped up and hung from a tree, and then the flesh would drop off and there'd just be the bones underneath, and then they'd be carried up by horse, or often by horse, to the sacred mountain Mangapohatu, and interred in traditional caves there. And we were filming this scene, and we had imitation skulls and bones and wrappings and so on. And the bodies were, blowing in the wind, and it was very eerie. And one of our elders had just died, and he used to have a cowshed near there, Bob Boynton, and he'd died, and we'd all gone to his funeral. The crew had been pallbearers for carrying the coffin into the cemetery, and I'd stayed in the wharimate with the women, unusually so, and laid next to Bob for 4 days because his family were coming from Australia. First screenings, I took it back to Tūhoe. I screened it in Rotorua for 250 Tūhoe. I screened it in Whakatane for about 200 or 300 Tūhoe. I'm still alive, which means that it must have gone okay. I can still walk, so that's good. Touch wood, day at a time. So that's good. It was a really great response. It was quite a quiet response. And people seemed quite moved about it. Some of the elderly women said it was a relief for them that this woman's story, which equated to their own stories, it was freeing in a way that kind of story was being told, as if it hadn't been told before for them. And we've got a very similar response from Maori, from other iwi. And we found that even some of the old guys, like one guy, Theo Tate, who had been a hunter in the Uraweras, he'd seen it for twice, and both times, tough old guy, crying. He cried all the way through both screenings. And in Australia, when it was screened, women were crying in the women's toilets afterwards. And in Poland, I was pleased because it was like a younger audience, which I didn't anticipate would respond so well. And they voted it as best film in Poland, in this largest festival in Poland. And so what we find is that slightly two different responses. From a Maori point of view, many feel that it could be their grandmother, because she's sort of like an every person, and and no matter what tribe, and it talks about things that aren't normally ever talked about, and people are very frank, they're very honest and self-effacing. And from when Pākehās have seen it, we did a sort of test audience, and we asked them what they thought, and generally people felt they were being allowed into something unique, something special that they wouldn't normally be allowed. Well, I grew up with stories. My father was a storyteller, part Irish descent, 4 generations back, and my mother's actually quite a good storyteller, and they both had very dramatic events happen in their life. They were both in the Second World War. My mother was in the British Army in Palestine, driving 4-ton trucks, and was a refugee from Germany. And my father got badly injured during the war. Was a prisoner of war and escaped dramatically. Lost 2 of a 4-person party. 2 of them were killed, escaping. So I grew up with stories, and what always amused me, actually, in my father's case, and I like the idea of folk, almost tales that there can be different interpretations and different meanings from, and the different meanings are actually all truthful, but because they're truthful for the people, they're individuals, they remember things differently, and they emphasize different things at different times. So my father, for example, had been a bouncer during the Depression, and he'd always tell the story with one version, that he would punch out some guy in one punch, and he's a big guy. And then years later, just before he died, he told the same story far less heroically, and he mentioned how one guy had been hassling this woman, so he grabbed him from behind, which he'd failed to mention ever before, put him in a headlock, whacked his head against the wall, and then threw him out. completely different version. And I love that thing that there are different versions of the same story, and they each have a certain truth for the people telling them.